Oh, hello, friends. David Vos here. Oh, my goodness, it's a beautiful day here in Oklahoma. Yeah, it's been kind of cool, like 75, 80 degrees. And got my vehicle all patched up, and I'm sitting here on the porch looking off at this beautiful scenery. Got a beautiful big pot of beans cooking. And I can smell it cooking, and it really smells good. Drinking me some coffee, and I thought I'd just sit down here for probably an hour or so and catch up with you guys. We got to do a video every day because we got to keep in touch, and because we don't have enough time in this world. At least not anymore. We got more time, because time is running out. And we need to know stuff. I mean, it's imperative that we understand. What the hell's going on, Edith? Because we're about to lose our mind. And we've been talking about a lot of ways you can lose your mind. I am completely surprised at how many ways you can lose your mind. And how easy it is for people to do it. How we have been living in a conditioned world where we are conditioned to believe what we're told. I mean, that's good in a sense, because everybody needs to learn when they're little to believe their mommy and daddy. Trust them. Whatever they say. But that makes sense because they love you. There's an incentive for them to treat you right, to teach you right, because they need you to carry on their genes. You know, this is part of life. But you know, there's always that destructive force. There's the genetic evolution that makes things better, and then there's that thing that creeps into the world that produces death. And what is that? It's true of everything. Like, you've got bacteria, and they say, oh, you got good bacteria and you got bad bacteria. Well, I'll tell you what, they don't know what the hell they're talking about half the time. So, I'll admit that, you know, well, I'm not going to admit that there's bad bacteria and good bacteria. I won't do that. Because that's not even a true characterization. They don't know what they're talking about. And we talked about, this comes to mind as an example. They talk about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. That is absolutely a lie. And this just shows you just how wrong these people are. You absolutely have to have bacteria too. But you also absolutely have to have cholesterol. And all cholesterol is good. But what you need is an imbalance. You need this kind of and this kind of balance. You know, you need it together. So the foods that you're eating, if you're getting way too much omega-6, you don't have omega-9, omega-3, whatever, they don't have the right balance, then you're going to get sick. And of course, part of it's because you're ruining the cholesterol by boiling it. See, when it heats it, it melts it and disrupts the molecular chain in the biology, so it clumps up differently. And it makes a long chain, so it cannot be digested. And it makes free radicals. A lot of things make free radicals, friends. So you're dying not from cholesterol. All cholesterol is good. Unless you ruin the cholesterol or you eat some sort of extracted cholesterol that they've extracted from something like corn. You know, you eat corn, you get a little bit of cholesterol, but it comes naturally in the food. But you extract anything like sugar out of a plant and make little white crystalline flakes and say, now this is sugar, eat it. That's not good for you. But if you just eat grain or nuts or anything that's got oil in it, you don't have to worry if it's balanced because it's a food. It's a whole food. So the problem goes back to the fact that you're not eating whole food. Now it's the same thing with bacteria. You see, You might explain it this way if you wanted to promote the idea that there's bad bacteria. Let's say you're going to make some wine. Well, you put the grapes inside of a jar, put a lid on it or a balloon so you keep the air out because there's bad bacteria in the air. Is it bad bacteria? Well, it's absolutely necessary for life, right? But here's the thing. There is a natural process that if you don't follow, which, anybody would follow it, it's a natural process. The problem is that we're not getting grapes the natural way. We're going to the store and buying our grapes. Now, what's going on there? Well, you see, here's the deal. There's this natural phenomenon in society that doctors, these rationalists from the Wilhelm Institute that have been studying, like Pasteur and, these psychopathic fiends that have been feeding us this pseudoscience for a long time. Here, take a pharmaceutical drug. You need dopamine. I'm sad, so I don't have dopamine, but that's because I'm sad. Okay, you're supposed to cry when you're sad, and when the sadness goes away, when you start torturing my children, then they're going to be sad. Now you want to give them drugs and live them on a chemical, and you think you're God and you can make them chemically balanced with your pills? No, we need natural life. We don't need your stinking society, which is creating torture and death. Of course we're going to be sad. So now you take your pill that you've extracted the dopamine out of something, and now my body can't promote or produce its own dopamine or serotonin. So now I'm depleted unless I eat your pill. And therefore I've got to go by your balance. And you can't balance my phytochemicals and the chemical responses in my body. You don't even know what you're doing. You're an idiot. That's pseudoscience. And it's exactly the same thing here, friends, with bacteria. You see, in nature, they don't even know what a bacteria is. They don't even know what a fungi is. And I'm sure you're probably thinking, yeah, and you do, Dave? Well, actually, nobody knows everything. We're not supposed to know everything. It's really just common sense, friends. Now, let's just think about this. You go to the store and you buy some grapes. Well, they're not even quite ripe. They're a little, they look all right. Well, they've timed this, see. They knew it would take several days to get from Napa Valley, or wherever they're picking these things, or Honduras or something, ship them, pack them with some ice or something, and ship them on an airplane over the clouds and through the woods and over to Grandma's house we go. And they finally arrive in your neck of the woods. Well, it's days and days and days have gone by. Well, think about it. These plants can't just live for days and days. They're going to spoil. So what you do, and you get a small season. You pick them when they're ripe. Well, they obviously can't pick them when they're ripe because then by the time they got to your table, they'd be spoiled. How does that happen? Why does that happen? But we need to know. We need to think about this. Naturally, on the grape skin is a thing called yeast. It's on there. Mold. Mold is yeast and fungi. It's all the same thing. And you see it growing throughout all of nature. You go out through the forest. There's a dead log. There's some kind of mold. There's a mushroom. Why all this mold growing all over everything? Fungi growing all over everything? Well, it's part of nature. It's meant to decompose when things die. So, trees dying, voila! Here comes some mushrooms. Here comes some mold, some fungi. Well, where does it come from? It just, out of the nowhere, spores, through the air. No, it's everywhere. It's the molecular, natural universe. The fungi has a little network of spores throughout the entire world. Just like, how does the minerals get in the ground? Oh, pretty good one, Spock. Watson, that was really, really smart. You know, somehow or another, you need to dissect the world and figure out why the Earth has the uranium at the bottom and helium at the top. Well, that's just the way it works. because you got a whole. You chop it up, and the parts are going to go where they are by nature, by the law of existence. So therefore, up's always going to be up, and down's always going to be down, and left's going to be left, and right's going to be right. But doctors want to come in and mix it all up and say, now, you take the left, and that'll be right, and we'll go on the up, and that'll be down. Somehow, they can pretend that they can mix it and chop it up and figure out how to make it new or different or explain it. It's so simple that if you try to explain it, it'll bust your little ionic cells in your brain. Okay, this is simple. My goodness, friends. So, it's part of, in other words, air. Where does air come from? I mean, who created air? It's part of the world. It's an element. It's up, right? Helium, the halo, hello, salute, salutations, sol, sun, the soul. The bottom is the base, the hardest, the heaviest, the uranium, the lead, the gold, the iron. The Earth's core is iron, they say. Well, the sun's got uranium, and it's exploding, and it's making nuclear bombs, and the gases, they explode, and they go to the top. And the light, it goes furthest out and goes all around a trillion miles and lights up and that's energy. The flow from the hard to the top. It's all working naturally, and it exists by virtue of itself. Because up is up and down is down, and you can't change that. It's an eternal, immutable law set in heaven by the divine being. Now, if you want to go any further than that, we're going to take more than an hour. So, therefore, you have solids on the bottom, liquids in the middle, gases on the top, and somewhere in that mix is going to be the fungi, and they're going to be there. I don't care what you do, they're going to be there. It's not some kind of spontaneous, like they used to think, well, where do these flies come from? It seemed how we put the fruit on the table, and we put it, maybe we seal it so nothing can get in there. And all of a sudden, a few days later, this starts to spoil. And by golly, there's maggots on. They just appear out of nowhere. Spontaneous combustion. You know what I'm saying? Where do they come from? Well, the flies are laying the eggs, and they didn't notice that. The maggots are the eggs growing into flies. Well, but you see, it's not. So they said, oh, we figured it out. See, I was taught as a Jehovah's Witness, and most Christians think that, well, everything was created by God. So God came down, he's got these big hands, I guess. I don't know how he even, gets those big knobby fingers, like big rock, Michelin tire man, coming out of the sky. And he parts the sea, and he parts the ground, and he makes the waters above and the waters beneath, and then he starts tweaking this little thing called a cell, the DNA. Wow, how does he do that? I think it's done through mind, because the Bible actually says that he said, let it be, and it was. So he didn't even use these big rock fingers. Yeah, he probably doesn't even look like the Michelin tire man. Whoa, that'll blow your mind. But what he does is that he is the divine principle that manifests the laws, right? He's consciousness. What is consciousness? He's being. What is being? Being and consciousness is that which is. By virtue itself, no one created it, but it creates everything else. And it's spontaneous. So long as God ever existed, he was thinking. As long as he was thinking, he was imaging. As long as he was imaging, he made images. And the images are forms. And everything around you is his tabernacle, the tent in which he dwells. All of it's his body. And he dwells in the body. You dwell in the body because you're mind. You're God. You're a divine being. And so we're learning by the things in which we suffer. Well, in this process, certain things just exist by virtue of themselves. And they always will. So if you traveled in one direction a million, zillion, trillion, kabillion, billion, zillion, million miles, and finally stopped, said, I'm tired. Whew. And oh, look at there, there's a planet. What's a planet? Well, it's a big round thing. Why is it round? Well, because that's the law. Equilibrium, certain forces and dynamic, energy, as it goes forward and it reacts with other things, and then they react with each other. So, The simplest form for anything to exist is a circle. There's always a source for any movement. The source has to go out in equal direction, equilibrium, all around in a sphere. And as that source or push or energy gets weaker, because of the fact that it's going out in different directions and exponentially getting wider and longer and bigger, then mathematically it's going to be weaker because it's a larger surface area. And at some point, the surface becomes a different vibration level. So it becomes fluid, and then it becomes air. And so this is all, it's very difficult to explain, but all of this is. The universe is one whole, and in the center is the source. And the center goes out in all directions, outward, but also inward. Because you can go infinitely within as well. And so the in cannot be the out, and the out can't be the in, and the up can't be the down, and so all these things exist. Hard, soft, yellow, blue, green, all these variables exist. One of the variables that just happens to manifest from the divine consciousness, the being, the reality that just is by virtue of itself, which is the divine, which is you. You exist by virtue of yourself, not the physical. That's your thoughts. You can change your thoughts like clothes. But the part that exists forever is you. The mind. In the beginning was the word, logos. You know, you go and you get a logo or a saying or you print a logo on your window. What's the logo? It explains who you are. It's an expression. It's the word. It's your logic logo. So it means the mind. This is why in Greek they call him Mercury, or, well, Latin. And in Greek he's Hermes. In Egyptian he's Thoth. We still get the word thought from that. So, thought, Hermes, Mercury, which also means mercy, or, you know, mind. This logos, is Christ, the only begotten of the divine, the expression of the divine. It's always there with the Father. And all things came into being with the Word. So there's the intent, the will, which is the Father, and then there's the Word, which is the expression. And that manifests, the Word manifests. So you think, and you imagine, and you speak it, and you command it, and it shall be done. And this is what made all the universe. So out from the source, which may not be in the center, because we said the center is just an imaginary thing. It's something to conceive. You conceive of it being in the center because it's the source that everything comes from and therefore expands outward, and we perceive of it that way. And so this is how then, and why then, everything in the universe, so the humans don't come from a polywog, as they say. Polywogs always exist and always will. So will humans. What it is there's one big DNA. It's the universe. It's the same pattern. But that pattern, it opens up fully and completely into the great divine being, which is a human. And it makes a complete, absolute image, a perfect image of the original divine being. Another complete whole. It has all the same attributes. But on its way to becoming whole, it opens up slowly, like a flower opens up. First it just buds. And then it begins to open the petals. And then fully it goes into a spiral, beautiful, centrifugal pattern. Everything happens that way. And diamonds and you know, when you're looking at a flower or a diamond, they have different facets and stuff. Or a tornado. Beautiful. Snowflake. All of this, the design coming from the center, the source, the motion. And out from the source comes the form. Out from the movement, the will, the desire, the intent comes the creation of the form. So the universe then has all of these beautiful things, and they all cohabitate with each other. Okay, they're all there by virtue of the very first spark. That first domino is the reason for the last domino to fall. There's a cause to everything, a purpose, a destiny, a perfect pattern, a vibration, a genetic code. So you'd never have a universe where you'd go down and there you are, and you went thousands and trillions of billions and zillions of millions and billions of miles, and you come to this little place and, oh, this planet's triangular. Well, if it's small enough, it might not have enough gravity to force it into a certain round sphere, but it might just be a kind of an oblong rock. That's possible because certain factors are at work there. But when it's big enough, it makes enough mass, it's going to have all of the, from uranium all the way to the top, all the way to the halo. See? Hello, Elohim, the gods. You know, Mount Olympus and the Olympians. And you're always going to be able to divide it up into 12, the 12 gods, so the 12 houses. Because that is the 12 hours of the day, the 12 hours of the month. I mean, everything is a mathematical, astrological, synchronistic code. And that's what numbers are. They're a way to understand the universe in its vibrations and its frequencies, and sort of to be able to use the numbers to prophesy or to determine, to know the beginning from the end. You see, the end already happened at the beginning. The first domino effect predetermines the last domino effect. So therefore, it's not like you're going to find on this planet that we newly discovered that, oh, on this planet they don't have fungus. That would be a chain in the link that you'd need. Just as if in your body you need all your minerals. If you have too much salt, salt, soul, sun. The salt's way up on the list, right? It's not like uranium. It's not hard. It's not down at the bottom or in the core of the planet. But salt is a mineral that's on the top, sort of crystalline vapors. So it's high up, not quite up to helium yet. There's only a few after that, like oxygen and hydrogen and helium. Those kind of floating their gases. But right on the surface, in the water itself, is the salt. Right? Just at the top of the liquid, it forms the dried up, you know, it's kind of a gaseous thing, actually, salt is. But when it dries up and leaves its remaining form behind it, we call it salt. Anyway, the salt has to exist, and because it's at the top, it pulls the flow of energy comes through the elemental or electrical conduit, and two dissimilar metals always make a flow. So copper and aluminum will make a flow. So you have an earth, there's a big battery, you take a copper pole, you pound it in the ground, aluminum pole, pound it in the ground, gets you a voltmeter. Check it out. Put one wire on the copper and one on the aluminum, and you'll see you get about a volt coming out of the earth. That's the natural vibration that's in all the world. But say you want 110 volts. Well, then you got to get an amplifier, a transformer. That's what you know, there's no such thing as 110 volts. That's only amplification, static electricity. Where the clouds go around and around and around and create amperage. Go around and around. You take copper wire and you wrap it around and around and around and around and around and around, and that 1 volt becomes 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and you get 110 volts or 1,000 volts. And if you get enough volts, you create a force. It pulls. It just pulls like gravity. Makes a magnet. And you can even defy gravity with a lot of charge. That's how Tesla created a machine that could lift huge, massive rocks. That's probably how they built the pyramids. They take the weight out of the rock with an electrical charge. But anyway, all of this is beside the point. It's just to get us to understand, I think, to help our mind to understand, first of all, why this exists. Because we want to know why fungus is necessary for your body. And why, for some reason, the doctors don't seem to understand what it is. It's life. It's food. And it's a natural process. So on this planet that you go somewhere in the middle of nowhere, it's going to still have the same up and down, left and right. And the highest form of life is still going to be mind, consciousness, which is human. And it's going to stand upright. It's not going to be a reptilian with, you know, reptiles are dumb. They're lower species. They are the same genetic code that hasn't opened up all the way to they haven't, you know, the light triggers certain, it activates the code in the genes. And scientists don't understand what this activation is. So we're using their words. Actually, light, like I said, with the salt, it just pulls the other minerals right out of your body, right through the water. It has a force upon the other minerals simply because the whole has to stick together and work together. So if you take away the copper wire, you don't get any voltage. You've just got the aluminum. You got to have the two dissimilar metals. You got to have a flow from the lesser to the greater, the negative to the positive. But in between the negative and the positive is a whole gamut. And it causes chemicalization, and it causes fungus, and it causes life. The flow of electricity is life. It's growth. But after it reaches a state of growth, then it eventually dies. And in order to decompose, it naturally grows. The grape naturally grows with a thing called fungus on it. But if you pick it green, the fungus isn't ready yet. It's not there. There's no yeast. You go out into your grape garden before it's ripe, and you check to see if there's any yeast on these grapes. And you say, oh, no, there's no yeast. Well, yes, there is, but it's in a smaller form. The spores are very small and undetectable. They're not there yet. It reaches all of the environment, the air and the soil and the sun, and all of these things are all working and opening and activating. The water activates, and certain minerals activate, and the sunlight activates. And pretty soon that little seed becomes a grape. And at the very point that it's ripe, there's something on the skin. A little fungus that begins to grow on the skin. It's a bacteria. You have it on your skin, on your body. That's what keeps you healthy. And if you go and scrub your body down with detergent, then you're not going to be healthy. And if you take those grapes and you put pesticides on them, and you try to eat them, then you're not going to be healthy. And if you leave the grape, if you pick the grape and you don't eat it, but you lay it on the table, then the fungus begins to deteriorate. Now, if you're not going to eat it, then it's going to have to go back into the ground. So it doesn't matter. It's not going to be the same process as if it goes into your stomach. So if you leave it on the ground, then the air is going to bring some bacteria. Now, it's not bad bacteria. That bacteria wouldn't get into your stomach. It's not going to hurt you. Unless you're stupid enough to go eat a grape that tastes like crap. That's laying on the ground that tastes like poop. You know, that's become vinegar. The certain kind of bacteria that wouldn't normally be there affects the grape, and it begins to turn into a rotten mess. Toxic to your system if you were to get that in your system. But that's no problem because you're not going to eat that. It stinks. It's natural. Bees know right where to go. They go to the flower. It's beautiful. Oh, they must have radar. How do they know where the flowers are? Because it's pretty. It's a yellow, red, purple flower. And it has an aroma. It's got smell. They can smell it. How do you know what to, eat? You smell it. You taste it. If it doesn't taste good, don't eat it. See, they say, oh, there's all these poison things in the nature. Well, most of the poison things are all very bitter. Right? It's not that difficult. And the Bible doesn't tell us to eat roots. We're not cows. We don't run around eating all the vegetation and eating the branches off trees. Too much fiber in the bark. You couldn't even digest it. You couldn't even eat it. So we don't have a problem with that. We know that we go to a blossom, and under the blossom is a fruit, a nut, a berry, or seed. Seeds are inside of a fruit, and that's another story. So why some of these hybrid fruits and stuff that I want to talk about at some point. So the fungus is naturally there on the grape, but it's only going to be there at the moment that it's ripe. And just at the point where it gets too ripe, you notice that the fruit begins to get mold. See, that mold is what you need, but you don't want it to go too far. And you don't have to worry about that, because if it goes too far, it's not going to smell good, and you won't like the looks of it. It won't be beautiful. It won't smell good. It'll probably smell bad. And so you don't have a problem getting into the wrong poisons or, messing up your system. It's just natural. You go out there and you eat food, and you eat things that grow like nuts, where the blossom is. It guides you to it. And so you take that grape and you put it in a bottle. And you put a cap on it because you don't want that air getting into it, because then it'll just spoil. That's kind of mimicking what would happen if you put the grape in your mouth and you put it in your stomach. Now there's no more air going to get to it. And the bacteria, the bad bacteria, is not going to get to it. Now, you could get some bad bacteria in your gut if somebody fed you some poison or some rotten slop. And that wouldn't normally happen. We have common sense. We wouldn't go and we were eating meat and we saw a dead carcass stinking or rotting in maggots. We wouldn't eat it. It would be putrid. We wouldn't want that. So we won't have much of a problem with that. It's just modern reasons why they have all these problems. I mean, people trying to sell you meat that they bought, they shot in Japan, right? They butchered it in Japan. They sent it, and they say, oh, it's got salmonella on the fish or whatever. Well, probably the only reason for that is salmonella usually exists it's natural in your gut, and you need it. And pylori, very, very dangerous in your gut. But the reason why you might get too much pylori is because you didn't get enough of the yeast. Because you weren't eating whole foods, because you're depleted in all of the yeast, and it's not fermenting like you would make wine, and it ferments and it makes wine. But if you get that bad bacteria in there with leaving the thing off, the lid, then it starts to become vinegar. Vinegar's acid. Wine is like 3-4, which is what you need, contrary to what people think. You're not supposed to be running around just drinking, it has to be 7, perfect. Boom. No, foods are all different. They're all over the place. You don't want to eat something that's really, really, really acidic, that'll burn through your skin. But you eat a natural balance of things. Actually, that's why coffee's good for you. Coffee's like 6. It's very alkaline. It's very good for you. There's a lot of potassium in it. One of the best things you can drink is coffee. Teas. This is a natural herb, friends. Nothing wrong with caffeine. That's a natural herb. And we're designed to want to make teas and herbs. They're for the healing of the body. The Bible says for the healing of the nations. So you naturally go out and you get the fruit and the nuts. You pick it when it's ripe, and there's going to be yeast on it. And that yeast is what we call a probiotic. You ever heard this word? Well, you wouldn't know what it was. You just know, I got to get probiotics. Why, let's go down to the store and buy a big pill. And what is that probiotic that you buy? Well, they call it Saccharomyces or Saccharomyces, which is, in other words, yeast. Saccharomyces Saccharomyces Cerevisiae. That is yeast that comes from grapes. And they used it because they were making wine for centuries. So they just used it and they made brewer's yeast out of the same thing. They put it in bread to make their bread as well. We've been using this particular grape yeast for centuries, thousands of years. Well, today they'll put in your probiotic, they'll put this other one, Boulardii. You think, oh, that's something else, some technical word. We don't know what this is. Only scientists know what this is, but it's good for you. It's probiotic. You got to have it. Yeah, that's the same thing as the other one, only that one comes from mangoes. So they went down there and scraped some mango yeast off, put it in a pill, and said, now here's this very important thing you need for your digestive tract. But you won't get it in food, of course. Yeah, that's where you get it, from mangoes and grapes and any, it's all over. It's everything has this fungi on it at the point where it's ripe and supposed to be eaten. Go a little further, then the air comes and gets involved. Now, say, how do you get the imbalance? Well, too much of the bad bacteria. Oh my goodness, then I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to get to too much of the bad bacteria. Well, you won't, you see, as long as you eat the fruit whole, you eat it when it's ripe, and you don't cook it, which means you sterilize it, or, you make it so that it's not there anymore. You negate it by cooking it. Now, you could cook it and then let it cool down, and sometimes a good bacteria will grow on it, or a yeast. You can ferment it. And there's sometimes, people make sake, or fermented rice, by taking the rice and cooking it. And then they put it in a jar. But they'll probably add yeast to it, but you wouldn't have to. There might still be yeast on it naturally. But you got to be careful in that case, because you might not, because it's already been cooked, you might not have enough yeast to activate the fermentation. And you might get too much of the bad bacteria. So, this is too complicated. No, it's not really, because if you just eat food naturally, it's not complicated at all. The only time you get in trouble here is when you're making wine and you take your grapes and you just lay them out on the table, or put them in a bowl, or in a wine jug without a lid, and there's a lot of air. Well, then what you're doing is you're letting it spoil. You're not supposed to eat grapes that way. You're supposed to eat grapes when they're ripe. You don't leave them out on the table for days and then they spoil, then you eat them? No, you can't eat them that way. So if you're going to take the grape and you want to eat it raw, then it's always going to be healthy. Unless somebody puts some, in nature it's going to be healthy. Maybe if you got it somebody's house or something, you don't know where it's been, then maybe it fell into a pile of poo-poo. I don't know, but normally your grapes on the vine are fine. Unless there's some acid rain or something that humans did. But you can eat the grape just like that, or the berries, or the mangoes, or the bananas. And it has that, you pick it ripe. No pesticides, you pick it ripe. And it's naturally going to ferment in your stomach and break it down so you can get the nutrition that you need, and you're going to be so healthy. Oh my goodness. Same process you use for winemaking. You put it in your mouth, it doesn't get any more air. So you put it in a jar, and you can ferment it so it'll still be good for you, because it's not going to spoil. You don't have to have a refrigerator. You can't, some of these grapes, you can't eat them all. You got to pick them, and then what are you going to do with them? You can't eat them all, right, before winter. So you put them and you make them wine. You ferment them. That's how human beings ate food. They knew how it worked. They picked it ripe. They sealed it so it couldn't get the bad air in there, the bad bacteria in there, and start an imbalance. And it naturally fermented on its own. Now, wine itself is probably a 4 in the pH level. But vinegar, when you get that bad air blowing around in there and it starts to rot, putrefy, now it goes down to very acidic. You hear people saying you should have vinegar every day. Apple cider vinegar every day. You know why that makes you feel better? Because your stomach is supposed to be very, very acidic. Why? Because it's a brewery. Wine is for. It's brewed. Soy sauce. Yogurt. Nothing wrong with that. But the acid that's in your stomach is hydrochloric acid, and it comes from, mostly, it's not supposed to come from sugar. Fermenting of sugar turns into alcohol, and then the body can use the alcohol, can burn it for fuel. Well, alcohol burns. But you're not supposed to necessarily eat sugar, because in nature, food isn't normally sugar. Well, certainly not white sugar, crystalline sugar, extracted chemicals. But even the fruit you would only eat in the summer. Most of the stuff that you would eat all year round is not going to be a sweet thing. A lot of foods, nuts are oily. They have a lot of oil, like olive oil or peanut oil, or even corn has a lot of oil. Grains have a lot of oil. Avocados, but so do walnuts. So does acorns and all the nuts, and pecans. Not so much sugar. No sugar. So your body works better on an oil. You can burn oil as well. So in order to burn and have energy, you just use the oil and burn it. But if you took sugar, then it's got to process it. It's got to go into make alcohol, and then it burns really hot. So it's not really good to eat sugar of any kind on a regular basis. So most fruit today, it's a hybrid form. Originally, there was very little sugar, and the pulp of the fruit was very small. And it was mostly consisted of seeds. If you look inside of a fruit, there's usually a lot of seeds. So there's 4 or 5 different things that you're supposed to eat. You wouldn't eat the roots, and you can eat the leaves. They're for the healing of the nations, the Bible says. The herbs, the vegetation, like I said, for the cows, the goats, they eat the vegetation. But we're a little more picky than that. We go out and we eat the grass, but we eat the grain on the grass. We don't eat the bran. We don't eat the straw, because we can't digest that. But we eat the grain. And so we don't eat the tree, because the bark of the tree is too much. We can't digest it. But we eat the fruit. With photosynthesis, the universe just produces a beautiful child, an offspring. You pluck it. You don't kill the tree. You just pluck it off. And that nut or fruit or bean, there's several different kinds, or grain that grows on plants, is the fruit or the offspring that you eat. Natural fruit, then, like berries. Berries is something that have always existed, but they only exist in the summer. And, they're usually for bears, mostly, because bears hibernate, and because the sugar sometimes is stored in your body as fat. So when you eat a lot of sugar, you get fat. And this is one of the problems of human beings today. We got a big fat around our midriff, and that's not good for you, because we're eating too much sugar and carbohydrates. In other words, potatoes and roots. We're not supposed to eat roots either, really. Not that you couldn't do it. When you don't have the other better foods, it's, taste better. You're starving, it's winter, you got to dig under the ground, dig up a root or something, like a varmint. It's possible, you can save your life. And there's some hybridized roots, like potatoes, that are more like a fruit now. They're almost like a sweet, they almost taste sweet, But in nature, you would normally eat the nuts, the legumes, or which are beans. A lot of trees are pod trees. A lot of pods, a lot of things. Peanuts is a legume, not nut. The grains and the fruit. So nuts, berries, grains, and seeds. Now, seeds is really the same as fruit, because the Bible says you eat the fruit with the seed therein. So it's a pocket of seeds surrounded by a little sweet, but not usually. The hybrid fruit we have today is much pulp. There's way more pulp. But what that pulp is there for, around the seeds, is when the whole fruit dies, it lays on the ground. It rots into the ground. The seeds die. They need food and nutrients when they sprout to grow. So all of that fruit that lies around the seeds becomes its fuel or its food. Now this, you'll see this in even eggs. The egg is not a chicken. You're not eating an animal if you're eating an egg. If the egg is fertilized, then the rooster puts a seed in there, and the seed grows to be a chicken. And as the seed grows, the chicken grows, it eats the yolk. That's kind of like what the seeds eat, the fruit, the pulp that lives off that until it becomes a plant. And so baby cows drink the milk. So we can eat milk, honey, fruit. All of those things can be eaten because that's what they are. They're a food, a source of food. But you got to eat them when they're ripe. And they're going to have everything you need to live. So one of the keys of why we're sick is the fact that we're not eating food ripe and we're not eating it raw. Because the yeast begins to ferment your food and creates enzymes. Breaks down protein, creates enzymes. And that will break down your food into these very small little particulars so you can get all the nutrition out of it. But if you don't break it down that way and you get the bad bacteria in there, it begins to spoil. Like vinegar, it becomes too acidic, which is a toxin. And you get sick because you're toxic. Most people are walking around very toxic. They're inflamed. The joints are inflamed. They're tired. They're slow. They can barely move. They're just full of toxins. They can't barely even move because they're not eating yeast with their food. The germ with their wheat. They take the word germ out. They just give you the extract. The white powdery flour that doesn't got any nutrition in it. You're not getting the wheat germ. You're not eating the fruit raw and picked ripe. And you're drinking vinegar. So people are taking vinegar and it's making them feel better because when you eat regular food, it goes into your stomach and it creates hydrochloric acid because you're mostly going to eat oils, nuts. And that will the body will break that down and make hydrochloric acid. And that breaks down the fats and makes acids and also gives you hormones and well-being and distributes all these vitamins and nutrients throughout your body. It makes you chemically balanced and supplies all the protein and the cholesterol, the fats and stuff to the rest of your body. So you're well lubed and you're getting all the life because the energy is flowing because you have all the nutrients. You're not breaking it down so that you're getting some kind of a acidic, inflammatory substance that's stopping the flow of energy. You ever see how a battery, after it works for a while, it begins to develop a deposit around the outside of the nickel plating, and then it won't give you a charge anymore. And it's dead. There's no more life. So the body does that. It begins to more or less get plaque, and that's that poison. That's what that is, because you're getting poisoned. It's not a free flow of electricity. You're not allowing your body to function properly. So, if you don't have the hydrochloric acid in your stomach, which is very acidic, a lot of acid, you can't digest food. But we think of it in terms of oh, it's an acid that like digests your food. You know, no, it's simply a fermentation process. Wine is the same principle. When you're making wine, you're decomposing. It's not like you're dropping a grape in some acid and acid breaks it all up so you can digest it. You got a bunch of acid in your stomach. What you have in your stomach is food. Bacteria. That's the acid that we're talking about. So when I say it makes hydrochloric acid, we're just talking, it's just weird words that they're coming up with. Really, you shouldn't think of it that way. They're using all kinds of symbolisms and words. It's confusing everybody. The truth is what we're trying to do is brew some wine in our stomach. The natural process of fermentation that converts sugars to alcohol so they can be burned, which converts proteins down to hormones and enzymes and things, and releases the phytochemicals that gives you well-being, that goes into your endocrine system, regulates your breathing, your thinking, lots of autoimmune responses. But the minute you start turning it to vinegar, the minute your gut, you cooked it, so now it doesn't have the yeast. You stopped the formation of the yeast. Now, of course, you're going to have an imbalance, because now that bad bacteria is going to take over and make a vinegar. So you've still got. So people say, well, I've got too much acid. I feel, oh man, give me an antacid. I don't have enough. I've got too much acid is what they're saying. You know, you don't have enough acid. You don't have enough hydrochloric acid, the right kind of acid. What you've done is you've putrefied the stuff in your stomach until it's a vinegar. Well, it's even worse than that. It's a poison, a toxin. And that's why sometimes you can take vinegar and take a tablespoon of that and you'll feel better. That's not what your body's supposed to have in your stomach, is vinegar. You shouldn't be drinking vinegar. You should be drinking wine. You should be eating food, grapes, which turns into wine in your stomach. If it's turning into vinegar, then it's not going to be as healthy. And if it's not going to be the proper kind of acid. You know, it's just a different kind. So it's not, all these little tricks. Oh, take some baking soda, that'll make you feel better. Or, drink a whole pint of coconut oil, blah, 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 blah. No, I mean, what you need to do is eat food. Natural, whole food. And you need to take the food that you can't eat raw, because we weren't supposed to have refrigerators. Then you need to preserve them. The modern way of preserving these fruits and things like this isn't good. This act of preserving them in mason jars. They didn't have mason jars until recently, glass jars. Putting a bunch of sugar in there. Heating it up and then sealing it. That's not how you preserve your food. You take the fruit and you put it on a rock and you dry it out. Dried fruit and dried nuts. You don't put salt on them. That's not a good way. You can use salt for meat. That's how they preserve their meat. They salted the outside of the meat, not the inside. It was just a layer of salt around the outside so that the bad bacteria wouldn't get into the meat. And then the inside of the meat, deep into the rump roast or whatever, it was fermenting with the natural course of fermentation that's in nature, that's all around, the fungus that grows everywhere, unless you kill it by cooking it or letting it spoil, lay out on the ground. Putting the salt on the outside of the carcass seals it so that it can ferment. You can eat that. That's what salami is. It's fermented meat. It's not cooked. So the old ways, people used to drink, they had sauerkraut, and, the Japanese eat this fermented soy. Well, I eat fermented beans. But it's not like what you think. You don't leave them out to ferment for days until they taste sour. You just need to let them sit out overnight, let them cool, and then you get a little bit of bacteria on them. And then they're healthy, because then they can finish off, they can ferment in your stomach. You don't have to ferment them on the counter. You eat your grapes raw, they'll ferment in your stomach. But you have to know the key, that you've got to ferment them. That's life. Life is the flow of energy through the proper elemental sequence. You drop in something that doesn't belong there, and you stop the charge. You take out the copper pipe, and now you don't have a free flow. You miss one, all your cells is the whole chain of the elemental chart. Because it's a little round thing like a planet. And inside the core is the hardest, and at the top is the helium, and it's the same with every cell. So you have to have a balance in your body. And there's always going to be a balance if you eat food, because every food has a cell, and there's a balance in their cells. And on the top is always going to be the fungus, right at the point of being ripe. Everything you cook, or everything you pick in nature is going to have that fungus. It's going to be on the ground, mushrooms. It's going to be on the trees. And everything that's supposed to be eaten, the mold or the fungus that's around it, at the point of being ripe, that's when you need to take it. And that's what's going to make you healthy and give you all the health that you need. So, this is the key, friends. This is the absolute key to being healthy. Eating fermented foods. Making your own wine. Making sure that you don't cook all of your nuts and berries. And if you do have to preserve them so you can eat them during the winter, you lay them out and let them dry. Let the bacteria and the fungus grow on them together. Because if you dry it out in the sun, the sunlight itself is what will preserve it. Because it stops the bad bacteria. It keeps the balance. As long as there's certain natural ways that people just know. I mean, they're very simple. You can put a grape on the table, and if it rots, you wouldn't eat it. But when you lay it out on the rock at the sunlight, that preserves it. You dry it out. Then you can eat it all throughout the winter. These are just the simple processes that we need to follow. So we drink our wine. But you see, if you go to the store and you get wine, they put sulfates in there because they know that the air is going to turn it to vinegar. So they put the sulfates in there so it doesn't turn to vinegar, because they want you to have a nice sweet wine. Well, they put a bunch of sugar in there. You need to go and make wine from your grapes and berries, dandelions, or whatever you make your wine out of. You need to make them without added sugar. Now, maybe that's not what you're used to. You're used to a nice sweet wine. Well, that's going to make you sick. It's going to give you headache. Because, you see, when you got more sugar, it's going to make more alcohol. Because it's turning the sugar into alcohol. And the higher the alcohol content, is going to give you a headache, and it's going to make you sick because it's drying out, dehydrating you. So, what's healthy is to naturally ferment your beans and your grapes. So, that's why in the Bible times, even children drank wine. Because they didn't make wine with a bunch of added sugar till it was, 20 proof. They simply just naturally fermented the grapes, and was a way to eat the grapes all year. They made all different kinds of grapes. And so, the Bible says the staff of life is what? What is the support? What supports life? This is very simple. It's important to know this. Throughout the Bible, the Old and the New, it tells you what supports life. It's a simple word. Well, they've translated it bread. And so you think in your mind, bread is what? Bread is wheat. Sometimes rye, sourdough, what's that, right? Still wheat. Maybe barley. That's what you think bread is. Well, if you just eat wheat and barley, and then you extract the bran and do all the things and take out the germ and everything that they put sugar in it and margarine, all that's poison. That's not the staff of life. What is the staff of life? Well, bread is not wheat. It's not even grain. That's not the original bread. Yeah, there's a recipe in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel, that's got one, equal parts of grain and beans. So people think, well, that's what bread is. I've even said that. Well, what I should say is that's one recipe. And then the only recipe we have of bread in the Bible is beans and grain, but not wheat. They use spelt and I forget different, probably rye and different kinds of grains. But it was equal parts lentils and beans and grains. But that's only one recipe. In fact, that was a recipe that God gave Ezekiel because of a famine. That was the, bread that you were going to eat because you had nothing else. It was a famine. It wasn't going to be your healthy bread. But no, real bread all around the world was beans, berries, nuts, and grains. Equal parts. And whatever you had. I mean, the natives, they would use maize, or they would use yucca, or they would use whatever, kinds of grains and nuts and things they had available. Nuts make a much better bread. Oh, it's better tasting and far more healthier. And beans, you can take lentils, put 1 cup of lentils, 2 cups of water, let it sit for a few hours, and then put it in a blender. And it's like a batter that you just make tortillas with it. Makes wonderful tortillas, and it's nothing but beans. You don't even have to add sugar or anything else. And you're not eating that white flour tortilla that people are eating. So what then is this thing that is the staff of life? Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And as the scripture says, man doth not live by bread alone. Well, no, we don't, because the physical body requires bread. Not the bread we got. Now remember, but nuts, berries, grains, and you mesh them up, make a certain loaf, and then you can bake them with yeast. With, sourdough. In other words, with the yeast that comes from the plant. And that is the staff of life. But we also need spiritual food, which is that inner spiritual thirst and hunger for the Word of God. But that illustration wouldn't work in the New Testament if bread wasn't the true staff of life. So, if you want to live and you want to be healthy, you eat the natural grains, nuts, berries, and beans. If you'll notice, you look into nature, you'll find that most of the things that grow, the fruits, I'll call them fruits because they're offspring of plants, like grains and nuts, they're an oil-based food. It's preferable that you eat most of it, that you eat oil-based. You can have some, you can take some of the berries and dry them out and mix it in with the rest of your nuts and grains. Like 1/5 of the amount. But mostly you're going to eat an oil-based. There's some sugar in beans, but it's got a lot of oil in beans too. And nuts are mostly oil. There's no carbohydrates hardly at all. Different kind of nuts don't have any carbohydrates, any sugars. And so it's less healthy to eat potatoes and carbohydrates and tons of berries. They're there for a treat, for sweet. And like I said, these are hybrids that we're eating. Most of the grain or the fruit that we eat now, they used to be a different thing. Like apples, their progenitor is the rosehip. They're not very sweet, but there's a lot of seeds in there. And then they've hybridized them and they've increased the pulp around it and made it sweeter. So it's kind of unnatural to eat a lot of sweet things. These big, huge watermelons and melons and stuff is kind of hybridization of natural food. The most important thing to eat is beans and nuts, friends. Eat lots of them in grains. But not wheat, because that's a hybridized form and we're not sure about that. But go get the whole grains. There's lots of different kinds. Amaranth. there's many different kinds of grains and seeds. But like I said, when I say eating seeds, a lot of the seeds are really just the stuff that's in the fruit. And there wouldn't be so much pulp. There would just be the seeds. You'd eat the whole thing. So the seeds and the nuts and the grapes, or I mean the berries and the beans. And then that would be what you would put into a patty and sort of brown it on both sides. And then that would be your staff of life. And that would be the thing that would... You'd eat it with your wine, as they did in the biblical days. The wine is a fermented food. And the bread would be from fermented... You know, a lot of times they wouldn't just use the seeds. They would sprout them. And so you've probably seen a lot of nutritionists and people who eat whole natural foods. They eat a lot of sprouts. Sprouts take that seed, because a lot of seeds you can't get the nutrition out of them. They're not. They need to be sprouted before they can be eaten. So when you're eating seeds, usually you sprout them. You can sprout just about any kind of seed, and it transforms that seed, the nutrition value, like 100 times. Sometimes 200 times the amount. So a lot of these things that we're eating would be better if we sprouted them first. And the reason for that is because the germ is so important in the food. This is what we're missing in our diet, friends. Eating the yeast and the germ. See, yeast is just grape fungi or mango fungi. And that's what people are going down to the store and buying. Probiotics, probiotics. Well, you don't need a pill. Just eat food, friends. Ferment your food. So Jesus fed them the bread and the wine. It was a whole meal. You say, well, is that all they ate? Just bread and wine? Yeah. A lot of times that's what they ate. Their bread was their food. I mean, it's not like they had this big 20-course meal back in those days. It was not like they had a big kitchen with ovens and freezers and the bakery section and all. No, no, no. They had a very small brick oven in their yard that they made their food with. Along with that bread, whatever they had, it was available. The Native Americans may have used maize and yucca and various different plants that they crushed and made a flour with. Patties, made sometimes a mush, like an oatmeal, a bowl of porridge. And along with their grains, and it didn't have to be bread either. Their grains and nuts and beans. A bowl of beans, right? A bowl of lentil stew, like in the days of Esau and Jacob. But along with that, they had their fermented grapes or their fermented dates. They had their alcoholic beverages, which that's what we call them. And we think, oh, they were boozers. No, they had real fermented food. All of their food was fermented. Except in the times of death. And they ate the unleavened or the unfermented foods. And so at the time when Jesus died, they were going through the festival of unleavened bread. And they did that for 7 days. Now, it wasn't something that they did to celebrate. See, they had crossed over from death to life. They had to give their firstborn child. Christ was going to die. This was a time of famine when they ate with their bitter greens. Yeah, they had to eat the bitter greens. They didn't necessarily want to eat onions, just chaw on an old onion. Those are herbs. They're fine, but that's not the bounty. They didn't even have time to put the germ and to ferment their wine. The wine season wasn't there yet. They hadn't gotten to the feast of the first ripe fruits and then the great harvest of Pentecost. But at the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then the Passover came and Christ died. And so it says in the Bible, the Apostle Paul says, do you not know that you must remove the old leaven that is of sin? For we're going to be a new lump, and we're going to be purged from the old leaven. For Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed. So let us keep the feast or the festival, not with the old leaven of wickedness and malice, but let us keep the festival with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So what is this talking about? We're not supposed to have leaven? Not at all. Remember what Jesus said. He says, be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees. See, the Apostle Paul just said that we don't want the leaven, the old leaven of wickedness and malice. We need to purge out. We have to go through the suffering. We got to go to the cross. Christ died on the cross at the end of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We got to get rid of that old leaven, which is the nature of the sin of the flesh, and purge it out through learning by the things that we suffer, suffering by eating this nasty bread that's not working right, that we had to go and mash it together and cook it in the oven. This represents trying to get enough nutrition out of the world, out of the food, by burning it in the oven and then adding some kind of old leaven to it, which is just going to lead to death. This is why it says in the book of Genesis, Yahweh says, you'll work the ground by the sweat of your face, and you will eat the lachem, which is bread, until you die. Well, this doesn't make sense, does it? The processed food, the burning, the cooking of the food until you die. Where you've got to add the leaven, the germ, back into it. Because it's got no life. You burned it. So, what is it? Is the bread the staff of life? Yes, it is. The bread is the staff of life because we're living in a physical world, but yet we still die. And it's the leaven itself that gives the life. That's what it's trying to say. But the life that we have in this world is temporary. We're not trying to get to 100 or 200 years of age, or 5 or even 900 years. No matter what we do, we eat the bread of this world, which is the staff of our physical existence, and we're still going to die. But that's what this God has given us. The gravity, the elements, this physical world, this particular form. The carnal nature which will eventually die. We take up our cross and we follow Christ. We're wanting a new immortal existence wherein there will not be any of this old leaven. But it's not a matter of trying to become unleavened like a lump of dough. It's trying to become, or it's trying to get to the next festival, which is the great celebration. And that's the day of Pentecost, when we get that Holy Spirit from on high. It's a higher source of life. And what is that? Well, it's the new wine that we're waiting for. What's the new wine? Well, it's when the grapes are ripe at the end of summer, right? And the festival of Pentecost came 50 days after Passover. Somewhere in the middle of summer, they started getting the first ripe fruits. And they were rejoicing because there's fruit. Oh, hallelujah, man. There is grapes and there's barley and there's beans growing. And it's the natural, fresh, living food. That's the true food that gives eternal life. And it's still the grapes or the berries, the nuts and the beans and the grains. But if possible, we need to eat those things natural and raw. But you see, the yeast then is already in there, but not something that we add. Not the old leaven, but it's the new wine, the natural. So we have to use our noggin, and we have to understand that we wouldn't rejoice to eat a charcoal piece of dead cooked bread. That's not the best way to eat it. The best way to eat it is natural and raw, and that's going to give you life. The life is in the brand new fruit from the vine. But if you do cook your food, You have to understand the process of fermentation. You have to understand what's important, that yeast is life. That bacteria, that living biology. You've got to understand what it is, because the scientists are lying to you. So, since we still have to go through winter, yeah, we still got to go through the seasons. We got to go through the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then we got to go to the Passover. We're going to die, winter's going to go, and then we're going to come to the spring. And we're still going through this process. We still eat food that's cooked at times. You know, if we have to. If we can get fresh vegetables and fruits, that's great. But if you're going to preserve your foods to get through the winter, this is how you do it, friends. You dry them out. You always make sure you allow the yeast, the natural life, the physical life that's in this world, the staff of life. You know what that staff of life is. It's the yeast. It's the germ, the fungi. And if you're not getting it on the food already picked ripe and raw and fresh, then you got to add it to your food and let it ferment. So that's how to stay healthy, friends. Don't listen to these doctors. They'll kill you. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't even understand the universe they live in. It's all a big bunch of pseudoscience, friends. But anyway, I see we're well over an hour. We went way too long in this video, but I hope you guys have a great day. We'll get back at this again tomorrow. We'll see you then. Have a good one.